Welcome back, everyone. We've added unique items to the Pulverize build, and it's had an enormous effect on the output, allowing it to clear tier 100 Nightmare with ease, long before glyphs are fully leveled or gear even fully optimized. For anyone unaware, the seasonal bosses have made farming unique items very accessible for players of all activity, including fairly casual players. And the build functions just fine without any of them, so you can use it while collecting them, as they don't define the build, but they certainly improve it. Pulverize is a great endgame build for anyone who wants to see massive crits on the screen, clear mobs before they get a chance to reach you, have a highly effective build with simplistic gameplay, and it's worth mentioning it functions great on controller as well. It's also a werebear build, so simply anyone looking to roar and swipe their way through hordes of demons, this is the build for you. This version is still relying on overpower for massive crits, and in just the time while recording gameplay for this video, I've seen the top end increase by about 2 million damage, or 25%, and there's still a lot of improvement to be made on this character. The gameplay you're watching is tier 100, and I've chosen this so that you can see the build can definitely play in the big leagues long before it's fully maxed, at which point you'll start seeing crits for around 50 million or so. If you're looking for a leveling version or other potential options, check out MrBenPlays.com. This site features creators like myself with a wide variety of builds that you can look through, ranging from casual builds that require no unique items to fully maxed endgame builds with the sweatiest of gear. Being an endgame version, we'll use 4 uniques in this setup, with the first being Godslayer Crown. It's got great affixes like extra health, cooldown reduction, and increased damage, but the best part is the aspect, which will pull enemies in, conveniently lining them up for a Pulverize. And don't miss the fine print. This says when you damage a boss, because this will proc the multiplicative damage portion of the aspect, allowing you to just nuke bosses in a couple of hits. Insatiable Fury has overpower damage, physical damage, damage reduction in werebear form, and damage reduction while fortified, and we'll have plenty of fortify to capitalize on this. The +3 to werebear skills accounts for 4 of our skills, so that's a nice boost to survivability and damage as well. In fact, the more damage we deal with this build, the easier it is to survive, so if you're developing your character, don't be afraid to do quicker runs at a level you can one-shot the screen. Tybalt's Will, and at this point I'd basically run this in any build possible, again with a couple of nice affixes in damage and damage reduction, but another multiplicative source of damage, and we can really take advantage of this with our setup. Grizzly Rage, Trample, Earth and Bulwark, and Metamorphosis, the Vampiric power, will all provide a means of activating this, and allowing us to just smash everything in sight. Try to rotate the cooldowns so that it's always up when you use a Pulverize, and that is basically the premise of the gameplay. Become unstoppable, wipe the screen, move forward, and repeat. Alternating cooldowns to keep the damage buff active, and saving it unstoppable for difficult elites so you don't get CC locked. The final unique is Banished Lord's Talisman. There's a good +2 to core skills, critical hit chance, overpower damage, and resource generation. All are great benefits for this build. Additionally, it gives us a way of guaranteeing an overpower, and we'll use several other methods to ensure more overpowers as well. For legendary aspects, there isn't much flexibility, and that isn't to say there aren't some options that exist if there's something you prefer, but these are really the best in my opinion. Aspect of the Air Sign Horror will add some continual damage after using Pulverize, while Shockwave Aspect will transform Pulverize into a very large AoE that travels across the screen. And this is the most important aspect, so keep an eye out for it. Aspect of Quicksand, and this causes Pulverize to slow enemies, which in turn lets us benefit from things like increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies as an affix or Paragon stat. Aspect of Retaliation is a multiplicative boost to our core skills based on Fortify, which will be bountiful with this build, as you'll see in the skill tree and Paragon sections. Aspect of the Umbral helps ensure we can maintain enough spirit while clearing trash to keep moving along quickly, and the stronger your character is, the less you'll need this aspect, but be mindful it also synergizes off the aspect of Quickspan because it procs when you crowd control a mob. The Spirit Boons will provide strong bonuses for us in the way of reduced damage from elites, maximum life, critical strike damage, fortify on using a defensive skill, and another method of overpower. And you can kind of see the recurring theme here. We want to overpower frequently, and we want to do large critical hits. For Vampiric powers, Prey on the Weak will add multiplicative damage to vulnerable targets, which works quite well with the exploit glyph that we'll be using in the Paragon tree. Sanguine Brace keeps our fortify stacked up, and quickly at that, since we often clear the screen with a single Pulverize. Blood Boil, and it's the guaranteed overpower we're after here. The boils themselves aren't awful, but very minimal compared to the overpowered crits that we'll get. Metamorphosis gives us a 4th unstoppable, and it's honestly better than Trample for escaping. Combined with Tybalt's Will, this turns our evade into an offensive cooldown as well, so keep that in mind when you're speedrunning or just running in general. Undying is not required as we have the Circle of Life in the skill tree, but I find it the most useful. However, if you were going to swap any of the powers, this is the one I'd recommend taking out for another preferred choice you may have, like Anticipation or Hemomancy. For the skill tree, we'll use Enhanced Storm Strike. This provides some damage reduction and a means of proccing the Godslayer crown, which is convenient to follow up using a Pulverize after we've generated some spirit if need be. However, Maul and Wind Shear are also viable options here. Maul if you want to maintain the benefits from bear form, and Wind Shear if you want to prefer to stay at ranged, with the shockwave aspect making this possible. 5 points in Pulverize, and you can take either final node. The stun will allow you to benefit from increased damage to crowd-controlled enemies, and the damage reduction is also nice if you're having issues surviving, which might be the case early on in the lifespan of this build. Wild Impulses adds damage to Pulverize at the cost of additional spirit, and this has a fairly minimal effect on how often we can cast it, so it's well worth the trade-off. Predatory Instincts for additional crit against close enemies, and Iron Fur gives damage reduction the majority of the time. These 6 points could be placed elsewhere if you're going for a ranged version of the build, where the extra survivability isn't needed. Preserving Earthen Bulwark gives us one of the many unstoppable options, while also granting Fortify, allowing us to deal more damage from Paragon and Overpower. Innate Debilitating Roar is a large damage reduction, a Fortify, and another method of slowing enemies. 3 points in Vigilance, given how many defensive skills we have, and 1 to 3 points in Ancestral Fortitude depending on your resists, and you'll want to be at or as close to 70 for all of them. Savage Trample gives us another unstoppable and a method of getting spirit back, basically a 1-2 combo for proccing Tibalts, and then unloading damage with Pulverize, and it occasionally saves your life or gets you killed sometimes too. 3 points in the trio, Crushing Earth, Safeguard, and Stone Guard, which combined give a lot of damage, and Fortify. This is pretty commonplace for all Earth skill builds. 3 points in Provocation, another method of getting an overpower, and between Mending and Circle of Life, these are somewhat flexible. You could do 2 and 2, 1 and 3, or even 3 and 3 if you didn't take some of the points in Iron Fur and Wild Impulses. 3 in Defiance, and 3 in Natural Disaster for additional damage on Pulverize. Supreme Grizzly Rage for a third unstoppable, and Fortify yet again, greatly increasing our damage and survivability. We also have the luxury of using this very frequently on this build, so don't feel like you need to always wait for the perfect moment. Ursine Strength will finish off the build for its increased life, increased damage while healthy, and boost overpowered damage. For Paragon, we're using Baldus' setup, which provides a solid mix of survivability and damage boost to everything that the build provides. It also has good flexibility for glyphs if you're still leveling some and want something to use in the meantime. For example, Territorial and Undaunted, although not preferred, will be just fine until you get Outmatch and Guzzler level, two less common glyphs. I would strongly suggest Exploit, which goes in the second board, being the first glyph you push to level 15. This will activate the secondary bonus, which makes all enemies vulnerable after you damage them. That's all there is to it, so give the build a try if you like very simple yet effective gameplay, with lots of orange numbers popping up on the screen. Thanks to Baldus for not only the Paragon tree, but his version of the build as well. This version is largely based off of that, with of course some tweaks in the areas that I prefer. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch, and enjoy this incredibly fun season.